Hello, Lou Hamilton from Audible Elegance here in Cincinnati, Ohio, just a couple doors north of the Montgomery Inn and across the street from Montgomery Cyclery in Old Montgomery. Please take the time to enjoy our work on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and X. And I also do a blog where we do different things. Most importantly, please do subscribe. It really makes a difference to our efforts. We'd like to improve both our audio and video, and subscriptions help us in that path. So if you want to see us improve even further, I'm looking forward to it. Tonight I'm going to respond to a question from one of my customers who asked about the boogeyman of, do I leave my electronics on? And I want to break this down into several classes of goods in the answer. If we're talking about vacuum tube products, the answer is no, because you're taking wear time on the vacuum tubes itself, particularly power amplifiers, and also from brand to brand, how hard or how much they push those tubes to get the performance they want can vary between it. So I'm going to say no, just across the board. I don't want to risk anybody's tube life, and that's a real factor. On power amplifiers with KT88s or all sorts of tubes, they're not cheap if you're getting quality. So vacuum tube, no. The next class of goods I want to get into are the home theater receivers and stereo receivers that are remote controlled operated. And in fact, they typically have two power supplies in them. One is to power the remote control system, so when you press the button on the remote, and hopefully it doesn't have bad batteries, that it turns the set on. Now, as far as I'm concerned, turn this stuff off into the standby mode. Whether or not it actually trickle charges the rest of the circuitry, I don't know. But the risk of leaving it on all the time is what effect it'll have on the display that you may or may not need, because you don't necessarily always look to the on-screen display of your television set. Certainly that's not the case in stereo receivers. So there, it's let it go to the standby mode and be done with it. So now we move on to the final level, which is dedicated preamplifiers and power amplifiers. And this is where the story changes, because many of those products use discrete componentry as opposed to ICs. So they're typically less susceptible to power surges and things like that. But you're also typically talking about much larger power capacitors. Now, years ago, in the case of Name Audio, they made it very clear that a Name Audio power amplifier would not come to its full fruition, its glory, so to speak, until it was left on for at least 72 hours straight. If you turn it on cold, and you'll hear this with other products, don't get me wrong, but when you turn a piece of electronics on cold that hasn't been powered for a while, it has a tendency to sound a bit thin, very anemic bass performance. But after a few hours, it begins to sound pretty good. And that's because the power capacitors are charging up. Typically, after about 5 or 6 hours, you're going to reach about 80% of full charge in the capacitors. And then the remaining 24 hours to 48 hours is involved in filling that final 20%. And people don't understand that the power supply capacitors are principally used for the performance of frequencies below 60 cycles. And so it's very important, if you want to enjoy the full spectrum of things, that they're charged. When they're not charged, it's almost as if somehow it's been tilted so the treble is more prevalent in what you're hearing, and that's not the case. It's the lack of the bass is what's happening, and that spills over into the harmonics as well of bass signals. Now, in terms of longevity, well, I have a couple customers who insist upon unplugging everything the minute they finish using it, as if they're going to extend the life of the product itself. I am not of that belief. I believe in leaving things on all the time if I can. Now, let's qualify that. That is something that's left on that is properly ventilated. If you've got a solid state amplifier stuffed in a cabinet that's not properly ventilated, you're going to cause the problems of essentially heat stressing the electronics themselves. So I much prefer open air cabinetry that we feature throughout the store, or something open shelving like we have here for the air electronics that we'll talk about in the next video. Keep in mind that the initial power surge of electronics is where things go wrong. We're no longer in the day of incandescent light bulbs, but in the old days, my days, the probability of a light bulb burning out while it was on was really low. Well, most of the time when you turned it on, it was that initial surge where the bulb went blink, and that was the end of it. So that's the effect of a surge running through an electrical wire. Well, the same thing happens in solid state electronics. There's that surge or the rush of the power. Now, some products have what's known as a soft start. So there might be a 10, 15, 20-second delay is while they're starting to bring it up. Then they release it and let the set come to life. They're trying to prevent that surge going through there and wrecking, componentry. I still take the position, leave it on. And so for the customer who wrote that question, I hope you enjoyed the answer. Obviously, there's going to be some schools of thought on this. Please subscribe, write your comments away. If I feel like I need to answer some of them, I will. If I think they're really good enough and can stand on their own and they don't need me yapping around a bit, fine, because there are some comments that are that good. So please do subscribe, and let's see what we can do.